Judge has denied prosecutors' request to block release of the autopsy reports of Shanann Watts and her two daughters. Investigators say Chris Watts, the husband and father, killed the three and dumped their bodies at an oil company work site. Shanann was pregnant. The Weld County District Attorney argued the cause of death will be critical evidence and should be sealed, but a judge ruled Friday that only the county coroner can ask to seal autopsy reports.
The house on Saratoga Trail looked like countless others on the block, trimmed lawns and quiet driveways holding the routines of young families who believed their lives were predictable. Shanann Watts lived there with her husband and two daughters, building a public image of normalcy that felt ordinary to neighbors and reassuring to friends. Work trips, school schedules, late-night arrivals, and early mornings blended into a rhythm so familiar that nothing about that August weekend seemed worth remembering at first. It was the kind of normal that leaves no trace until it does. If you're drawn to stories that uncover truth slowly, where facts matter and silence speaks louder than words, subscribe now so you don't miss what comes next. When Shanann returned from a business trip in the early hours of the morning, the house accepted her back without protest. What happened after that point was not witnessed, not recorded, and not fully understood in the moment. Investigators would later rely on phone data, door sensors, and routine habits to build a timeline, but in those first hours, nothing appeared visibly wrong from the outside. The neighborhood woke up as usual. Garage doors opened. Cars left for work. The Watts home stayed quiet. Concern began with absence. Shanann missed a scheduled appointment. Her phone went unanswered. Messages piled up without reply. The kind of silence that initially feels inconvenient slowly turned heavy, pressing on the people who knew her patterns best. Friends noticed the break in routine and refused to dismiss it. Law enforcement was contacted, and officers arrived at the house still framed by the illusion of normal life.
Trip this weekend.
Right.
And I dropped her off at 2 o'clock this morning. She's 15 weeks pregnant. She wasn't feeling well, and she had a doctor's appointment this morning at 9, and I told her to let me know if she needed me to take her. She's got 2 little girls, and she was very distraught over the weekend, wasn't eating normally or drinking, and we kept trying to force it on her because she's pregnant. Her husband and her supposedly are separating, but she didn't know this. She thought they were just having issues. He disclosed that to me today.
Okay.
Because I called him, and I was like, have you talked or heard from Shanann since she left for work this morning? Because I can't get a hold of her. I've called, I've texted. Her car's in the garage, her shoes she wears every single day right in the front door.
Inside, the air felt wrong in ways that could not yet be named. Personal belongings were present. The house showed no obvious signs of a struggle. The children's rooms remained intact. It was a scene defined not by what was visible, but by what was missing. Shanann and her daughters were gone. At that stage, investigators could confirm only a narrow set of facts. She had arrived home. She had not been seen since, and she had left behind items she would not normally abandon. As the search expanded, uncertainty deepened. Surveillance footage showed a familiar figure loading a truck in the early morning darkness, movements calm, deliberate, and unhurried.
What else can I do with this? My detective just showed up. So he'll probably want to talk to you. He'd probably, like I said, he might have you call at the bank and see if there's any kind of activity.
Because if there is any sort of action out there,
his camera's
I would have got it.
Like
Right.
we had issues the other week when people were stealing stuff out of like garages and stuff like that, and I had parked my truck
I had
up
to
here.
park right here.
Yeah. So someone,
See if
I could
anything
see where someone tried to jimmy with a flathead screwdriver over there, and it was just like.
But if any action would have happened, any cars or anything left your house, I would
Yeah,
have
if it would
got
have
it.
been like right in that area, they should have picked. I mean.
Oh, it'll pick up anything coming down the street this way.
You know where that tree there too?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Watch, I'll show you. There's nothing on here. We've already watched that one. But like, you'll see this car.
What security system do you have?
Xfinity. Oh, you can see this car starting to drive down the street.
That ain't one.
Oh, look.
See what I'm saying? It picks up all the way down there.
That's cool.
He's next door.
There we go.
It'll be code 4.
Cause yeah, we can pick up cars coming this way, I get anything coming this way making this turn. So, and usually
The footage did not explain why. It did not show violence. It offered no clarity about where anyone had gone. Each confirmed detail seemed to open more unanswered space rather than close it. Halfway through this story, if you value careful, fact-driven true crime that avoids noise and respects the people at its center, subscribe and stay with me. Days later, the focus shifted from disappearance to recovery. The locations where Shanann and her children were found forced investigators into a new phase of the case, one grounded in physical evidence rather than absence. The autopsy would become central, not as a source of spectacle, but as a quiet record of truth. Medical examiners approached their work with restraint, documenting injuries, causes of death, and timelines without interpretation or narrative. The body does not explain why. It only reveals what can be proven. Shanann's autopsy confirmed death by asphyxiation. There were no signs of prolonged struggle, no defensive injuries that could rewrite the known sequence of events. The findings narrowed the window of time and removed certain possibilities while leaving others unanswered. What it revealed was not motive or emotion, but finality. The report did not speak of fear or betrayal. It did not capture the life she lived before that moment. It simply established that her death was deliberate and that it occurred within the confirmed timeline investigators had already begun to assemble. For the community, the clarity brought no comfort. Answers arrived stripped of meaning, precise but hollow. Friends, neighbors, and strangers following the case were left holding facts that did not explain how normalcy had collapsed so completely. The autopsy closed certain doors while leaving the larger question untouched, the one that lingers long after evidence is cataloged and reports are filed. The house on Saratoga Trail still stands, but the quiet it holds is different now. The story does not end with certainty or relief. It ends with documentation, with records that tell us what happened to Shanann Watts' body, but not how an ordinary life unraveled into something that continues to disturb long after the investigation stopped speaking. The investigation tightened not with sudden revelations, but with procedure. Evidence was logged, timelines refined, and movements compared against what technology could confirm. Phone records showed when communication stopped. Door sensors recorded openings and closings that aligned with early morning activity.
In the company.
And that night, that day she was back,
I left work early that morning, like 5:15, 5:30. So like she barely got into bed pretty much.
this might be a tough question, but did you guys get into an argument before she left?
It wasn't like an argument. We had an emotional conversation, but I'll leave it at that. But I just want them back. I just want them to come back. And if they're not safe right now, that's what's tearing me apart. Because if they are safe, they're coming back. But if they're not, this has got to stop. Like, somebody has to come forward.
You spoken to her family, like her parents?
Yeah, they've been in constant contact, like every hour. I mean, everybody back in North Carolina and the East Coast. I mean, from Maine to Florida.
What is her parents saying to you?
They're just like if they need to get on a flight, just let them know. Because I mean, they feel helpless right now because they're on the opposite side of the country. I mean, Colorado is. I mean, you can't just drive around and look. I mean, it's just like you wouldn't really know what you're looking for. That's what the cops pretty much told me. That first day, I was like, I want to get out and drive around. They said, you wouldn't know what to look for.
Last couple questions. What is law enforcement?
GPS data traced a familiar route away from the neighborhood. Each element was ordinary on its own, but together they formed a narrow corridor of time in which everything changed. If you want more stories told this way, careful, factual, and immersive, subscribe now and stay with the series. As attention shifted from the house to the wider landscape, the emotional weight spread outward. Friends replayed their last interactions with Shanann, searching for meaning in moments that once felt harmless. Neighbors questioned how a crime so intimate could occur without sound or warning. Investigators remained anchored to what could be proven,
the polygraph failed it. Yeah, because there's too much emotions. So I mean, they're not gonna let me go.
Is there any reason why they shouldn't?
They know I had an affair. And they know. I can't complain about that.
They know you had an affair. Anything else you want to tell me? What's going on, or what happened, or anything? Or you know anything about?
When we had that conversation that morning, it was, it was emotional. It was told her about separation and everything like that.
What happened after that?
I mean, I went downstairs and
resisting narrative and focusing instead on verification. What was known continued to grow. What remained unknown refused to shrink. The autopsy findings became part of this larger structure, not as a turning point but as confirmation. Medical evidence aligned with the digital trail, reinforcing the established window of time and ruling out alternative sequences. There was no ambiguity in cause of death, yet there was still distance between evidence and understanding. The science spoke clearly, but it did not speak completely. As the case moved toward legal resolution, public attention intensified. Court documents replaced speculation, and verified facts replaced rumor. Still, the psychological tension did not ease. The community was left confronting a reality that felt incompatible with the life that had existed before. The loss extended beyond a single family, settling into a collective awareness that safety and familiarity can fracture without warning. If stories that stay with you long after they end matter to you, subscribe to hear the rest unfold. Even with convictions and conclusions, something essential remained unsettled. The evidence explained how events aligned, but not how trust eroded unnoticed. Shanann Watts' Autopsy revealed the truth of her final moments in clinical terms, but it could not translate loss into comprehension. The silence left behind was not a gap in information, but a reminder that some answers never arrive. Even when every document is complete, what followed was not chaos but process. Reports were finalized, evidence was sealed. The autopsy findings were entered into the permanent record, stripped of emotion and reduced to medically verifiable conclusions. In court filings and official summaries, Shanann Watts was described in terms that felt distant from the person people remembered. Height, weight, cause of death, time frame. The language was precise, and that precision carried its own kind of cold weight.
It's made by the victims in this case. The court's going to find that the plea agreement is fair and reasonable under the circumstances. I want to acknowledge the Rusick family as well as the Watts family that showing mercy on Mr. Watts is understood, and I respect that decision to request that the district attorney not seek the death penalty in this case. And so the court is going to accept this plea bargain under the circumstances. Words that come to mind when I hear the evidence in this case are a senseless crime and the viciousness of the crime. And equally aggravating in this court's determination is the despicable act of disposing of the bodies in the manner in which they were done in this case. I've been a judicial officer now for starting my 17th year, and I could...
If you appreciate true crime told with restraint and respect, and you want to hear the full truth as it's known, subscribe and stay with the story. For For those left behind, the finality of documentation did not bring resolution. The autopsy confirmed what investigators already suspected, but confirmation is not the same as understanding. It did not explain how a shared life deteriorated without visible warning, or how violence emerged from routine. The medical examiner's work closed investigative questions while opening emotional ones that had no place in official records. The wider community absorbed the case slowly. It moved from breaking news to reference point, from urgent updates to something spoken about in past tense. Yet the unease lingered. The facts were no longer in dispute, but the implications were. Ordinary homes, ordinary schedules, ordinary trust, all of it felt newly fragile. The story refused to stay contained within its paperwork. Midway through remembering this case, if you want more narratives that confront uncomfortable truths without distortion, subscribe for what comes next. Shanann Watts' Autopsy did not sensationalize her death. It did something quieter and more unsettling. It reduced the final moments of a life to evidence that could be measured, weighed, and archived. That transformation is often where the deepest discomfort lies, in the space between who someone was and how the system must describe them when they are gone. The case ended on paper. Sentences were issued, files were closed, but the absence remains active.
A maximum sentence would be appropriate, and anything less than the maximum sentence would depreciate the seriousness of this offense. So the court is going to sentence Mr. Watts as follows. With regard to count number 1, murder in the first degree as it relates to Shanann Watts, the court is going to sentence you, sir, to a life sentence in the Colorado Department of Corrections, followed with no possibility of parole. And that is going to run consecutively to all but counts 3 and 4. With regard to count 2, as it relates to murder in the first degree with Bella, the court is going to sentence you to life in the Colorado Department of Corrections with no possibility of parole. With regard to count number 3, the court is going to sentence you as it relates to Celeste to life in the Colorado Department of Corrections with no possibility of parole.
The house, the neighborhood, and the people who followed the story are left with a knowledge that feels complete and incomplete at the same time. Everything that can be known is known. Everything that cannot be answered still echoes, unresolved, long after the facts have stopped changing. As time passed, the case settled into memory rather than motion. News cycles moved on, but the records remained unchanged. The autopsy report, once a focal point of attention, became a static document, referenced, cited, and archived. It continued to say exactly what it had always said, nothing more and nothing less. The body told its truth once, and it did not evolve with public reaction or private grief. If you're following this story because you value careful truth over noise, subscribe to continue hearing cases told with clarity and restraint. For investigators, there was nothing left to extract. The timeline held. The medical findings aligned with physical and digital evidence. Each conclusion rested on confirmation rather than interpretation. Yet even with that completeness, the case resisted emotional closure. The autopsy could define how Shanann Watts died, but it could not account for the erosion that preceded it or the shockwave that followed. Families across the community absorbed the lesson quietly. Routine was no longer invisible. Missed calls carried weight. Silence became something to notice rather than dismiss. The crime altered behavior not through fear, but through awareness, a subtle recalibration of how ordinary life was understood. Nothing dramatic changed on the surface, but something underneath never fully returned to baseline. The enduring power of the case lies in what remains unanswered without being unknown. There is no missing evidence, no alternative timeline waiting to be discovered. The discomfort comes from the limits of fact itself. When every confirmed detail has been accounted for, what lingers is not mystery, but the realization that truth does not always bring relief. Shanann Watts' Autopsy revealed the end of a life with clinical certainty. What it could not reveal was how a future disappeared so completely within the boundaries of an ordinary day. That absence remains, quiet and unresolved, long after the files were closed, continuing to exist not as a question of what happened, but as the unsettling knowledge that sometimes the facts are all there is. With distance came reflection rather than discovery. The case no longer generated new filings or forensic updates. What remained was the imprint it left on systems built to record endings, not lives. The autopsy stayed unchanged, a fixed point anchoring the entire investigation, immune to reinterpretation or time. Its conclusions were definitive, yet emotionally incomplete, offering certainty without consolation. If this kind of storytelling matters to you, measured, factual, and unflinching, subscribe to keep following stories that refuse easy closure. In the absence of new information, meaning shifted to impact. The loss reshaped conversations about trust, visibility, and the quiet assumptions people carry into daily life. Friends remembered Shanann not through documents, but through motion and intention, through plans that never reached completion. The contrast between who she was and how the system had to summarize her became impossible to ignore. Nothing further was required from investigators. There were no loose ends demanding pursuit. The process had done what it was designed to do, yet the human response continued long after procedure stopped. Awareness lingered without direction, a residue of knowing that documentation can be exhaustive while understanding remains partial. For those still listening, still absorbing the weight of it, subscribe to stay with stories that sit in that uncomfortable space between certainty and comprehension. Shanann Watts' death was explained in medical terms that leave no room for doubt. What persists is not a question of evidence, but the recognition of limitation. When everything verifiable has been verified, what remains is silence shaped by fact rather than mystery. It is that silence, precise and unresolved, that keeps the case present, long after the record stopped growing.